In ElectroBIM, we have the project options, and this is where you control all the various settings you have for ElectroBIM in your project. And there's a lot of options, and we will take a look at all of these. When you make these changes, you then have to figure out how to get these changes to other projects, because when you make a change to all of this, you're going to get this set up once. You want to have it all configured for how your company likes to work, and you don't want to have to make these changes in every project. There's really two ways you can handle that. One, you can open up your template file, run this command, the project options command in your template file, and make the changes there. And then that template will have the settings in it, and then all projects based upon that template will have your settings. The other option is to use the customization, export, and import commands. So you would find the project, you would get everything set up properly there. Then you can run the export command. When you run this, you have choices for what you are actually exporting and where you're exporting it to. So you give it a file location that you're going to export, and then choose what you want to export, the various option settings, and then also some wire sizing and transformer settings. And you can save that to a file. And then in future projects, you run the customization import command. So you take that file that you've exported it, and then you import it into other projects. So that's just two different ways you can do the template, or you can do the export import. One benefit to the export import is that you can then pull that into projects that have already started. Otherwise, if you use the template, you have to make sure to start with that template. And then once the project started, there's no way to update it. So the export import gets around that limitation with the templates. So if you have a template, you can set that up. There's probably a place for everyone to be using export import as well. Let's take a look at the feeder ID options. These first set of options are controlling what the feeder IDs look like when they're created, the formatting for that feeder ID. For complete details on this, take a look at our training on feeder IDs, because there's a lot to it, but we can briefly go over these. The first is whether you include feeder IDs on your feeders or not. If it's set to yes, we're going to include the feeder IDs. If you set it to no, we won't include those. And then the assumption is that you're going to be including a label with your wire size or some other way you're documenting it. So you can turn the feeder IDs on and off on your single line. Then you have the option for the format. We have two formats, a short and a long format, for how much text we're including, depending on how you like that to be. So those are our default formats. And you can also use your own format and just type them in manually if you want to. For our formats, we separate out the ground type. And if it's a service ground, we add an additional label. So we have three options for what that label should be. It can be T for transformer, J for jumper, or S for service ground, depending on which letter you like. We used to just be J. We since changed our default to T for transformer. I think that's actually a better name, because your service ground is really typically coming from the transformer. We included S as an option because that matches the service ground label in the NEC. We don't really like that as a default. We don't use that as a default because an S and the 5 look very similar. We didn't feel like that was actually an appropriate letter to use, but if you disagree and you want to use S, you've got the option there. Then we have the option for whether we create these feeder IDs automatically. If it's set to yes, when we need an ID, we will create it. If you don't like our feeder IDs and you want to use your own system, change this to no, and then every time we need an ID, we will prompt you, and then you can specify it, and it's going to be used for the rest of the project. So that's how you can override our feeder IDs. Change that to no, and then it'll prompt you and let you create them as needed. And finally, we have two options for transferring the feeder IDs to and from the master schedule. Again, take a look at the training on feeder IDs for demonstrations on how all these options work. Then the last set of feeder ID options are for controlling the feeder ID schedule. So that schedule is shown down here. So this is what the feeder ID schedule looks like. And then controlling the format, we have the options for that. We have the title, which is the title for the feeder schedule. Then we have the text types for the title and for the callout. So those can be set separately. And then the line styles for the border of the entire feeder schedule and the interior cells. So you can have these interior lines drawn differently from the border. And finally, we have a maximum height. And if it exceeds that height, and this is inches on the printed page, it will draw multiple columns of feeder schedule. So if we change this to 6 and we insert the feeder schedule, it would put a second thing over here. So the max height controls how tall this is going to be before it makes a second column of feeder schedule. For the text type and the line style, those are referring to Revit settings. The text style is going to be blank by default, and we will use just whatever one Revit gives us when we ask for a text style. So taking a look at the Revit sample project, which is not configured with ElectroBIM currently, you'll see that these text types are blank. So we're going to be randomly choosing the text style. You really want to assign these to the text styles that your company uses for titles so that we're using consistent values. If you select text in Revit, you then have this edit type, and this controls the types in Revit. So you can see the list of types that are available. You'll want to assign that in the project options to match. And you can create new text styles here if you need them. Generally, you're going to have these created for your company already, and you can just assign them to ElectroBIM. The line styles are under Manage. So if you go to Manage, Settings, Additional Settings, under Line Styles, this is where all of the line styles are configured. You can see that we have our DME, border, and cell. You can override those with your values if you want to use them, or you can assign different line styles.